ask you to give a round of applause for a visiting scholar and guest.
How do we create communities that are socially just? And when we talk about communities, I'm not really talking about the demographic, where people live. I'm talking about communities of identity, communities where people have a sense of belonging. So how do we create socially just communities that embrace forgiveness and understand forgiveness as one of the primary pathways to social justice? That understand forgiveness is critical to when we're talking about authentic and sustainable racial healing as individuals and families and organizations, and racial equity, fairness, when we're talking about organizations and communities as well. So, if we were a smaller group, I would ask each one of you, what pronoun do you want to use as you're sitting around this room? And some of you would say, my pronoun is he. Some of you would say, my pronoun is she. Some of you would say, my pronoun is they. We can never take for granted by the way people look, by our own projections of what we think and how they act, how they want to be identified. So whenever we enter into a group of people, we ask them, by what pronoun do you want us to use to speak to you? Because that's one way of letting them know that they are being seen. And the most important thing in the world for people is to know that they are seen. Are my intentions for us for today. So, by the end of this time together, you all will have a deeper and better understanding of the components, the key components, how they come together in terms of overlap and how they're different in terms of forgiveness and racial healing and racial equity. You'll have an ability to express your own thoughts about where you're at in terms of degrees of comfort in talking about forgiving yourself, forgiving others, where you get stuck and what do you think your organization is stuck. And applying these concepts to our own lives and to the lives of people around us. And then we're each going to commit to one action, one thing that you will do to take a step toward, closer toward self and other forgiveness and racial healing and racial equity, to actually facilitate social justice for everyone. And that's what I meant when I said we together can co-create this world where everyone is seen and everyone is valued and everyone knows how valuable they are. There's this incredible man that came into my life many years ago. How many of you have heard the name Paulo Freire? You can do it higher than that, Erica. Okay, thank you. Paulo Freire. Anybody want to tell me who Paulo Freire was? Was he from this country? Where was he from?
Brazil.
Brazil. And what was his, what kind of work did he do? He was an educator. He was an activist, right? He was from São Paulo, Brazil. And he dared to teach the quote-unquote peasants how to read. Because what can happen when people learn how to read? Power, to shift the power, right? They can check and see, they can read newspapers, they can see their bills, right? So reading was not supposed to happen at that level in São Paulo, Brazil many years ago. So he was, and his wife at that point, Eva, were kicked out of the country, excommunicated, and they found this little place called Harvard, okay, in this country. And he started writing and talking. A long story made short, okay? Bell Hooks got to know Paulo Freire, and she said, he's sexist because he used he all the time. But no, he was a product of his culture, his society. And then in one of his later books, before he tragically passed from an unanticipated heart attack on May 2nd, 1997, I was called because I had had an opportunity to spend time with him. He wrote a book called Pedagogy of Hope. So it's a little easier to read. And after that, he proclaimed himself, and Bell Hooks agreed, he was a feminist. okay? Because his spirit was there, but he was a product of his society. So Paulo taught us that the language we use is very important. He talked about it as the power of the word. The power of the word. So if we know that language is important, it's important that we have a common understanding. Because language, we oftentimes, particularly with the English language, or I should say the American language, right? What we tend to do is we tend sometimes to use the same word to mean multiple things, and we use multiple words to mean the same thing. So for our time together, we need to make certain that we're using common definitions. So that's what I'm going to provide you with. You'll just walk with me and kind of buy into these definitions. I spoke with some dear friends of mine. I'll point them out as we walk through together, and some of these are my definitions. So the first is race. The definition of race that I'm offering to you comes from reading a lot and talking a lot about what does race mean. Race is not a scientific concept at all. Rather, when we think of race, we typically think about it, or it's popularly understood, as referring to one's physical characteristics, the texture of your hair, your accent, the people you hang around with. The scientific rejection of the concept of race has interestingly created even more popular acceptance of what does race mean. So we define ourselves oftentimes in terms of communities of race. We say, I'm an African American, I'm a Latino, I'm a Latinx, right? We talk about that in terms of our collective understanding, and it's a shorthand. People understand then a little bit more about who we are. Ethnicity refers to a group of people that share these racial characteristics, that have a common heritage. And in fact, we have oftentimes used the word race and ethnicity so interchangeable to mean the same thing that a whole new term has been coined. It's called ERI, ethnic racial identity. Another, prejudice. A prejudgment. A prejudgment, a bias that is based on not necessarily reasonable thinking. It's not even based on something you've actually experienced. But it's based on emotion. It's based on maybe what you've heard. It's based on what you learned in your family, potentially. A stereotype is different than a prejudice, different than a prejudgment. It's a firmly held belief about specific characteristics of individuals. We take those specific characteristics and we think about them and we project them onto an entire group of people. That is a stereotype. You know these words, right? Discrimination. Discrimination by itself, that word literally means making a distinction. We discriminate, we have discriminate tastes, right? Some of us love sweets after we eat. Some of us love savory food. We discriminate in that way. Racial discrimination, though, is when we act on our prejudices, when we act on our stereotypes. Racism, once called America's original sin. Racism is a belief in the superiority or the subordination between and among those different races that we were talking about a moment ago. Racism can be held by individuals, by some of us, so we get concerned how we talk to people. We don't want to be seen as a racist. We want to be politically correct, right? Racism can be held and reflected through institutions, the way they're set up. Racism can be conscious and subconscious. Racism can be reflected in our policies. And some people say that racism is prejudice, is prejudgment plus power. What that means, if you translate it, is that people of color, by that definition, in this country, cannot be racist. Some people believe that, right? I'm not one of those people. I do believe that we, because we're products of this society, we can't help but have isms in our head, and in this case, racism, racist thoughts. And even within groups, I'm going to pick on my own racial identity for a moment as an African-American woman. We started out many years ago, we were called colored and Negro and Black, and we've changed our titles. I'm looking into the eyes of a sister here. We've changed how we identify and how people have seen us for a long time, right? We have so much believed that white is right that only recently have we given ourselves permission to wear our hair natural. We did it in the 70s. We rocked those froze. You're too young to know. Now, though, we've got these millennials that are teaching us you can wear your hair any way you want to. How freeing is that? Reclaiming our identity. But there's still these little kernels of racism even within people that have been discriminated against. And I could go around the room, and each one of you, I'm sure, would know exactly what I'm talking about. Microaggressions. Microaggressions. The reality of the differences in races and ethnicity and the reality of overt racism started making people think about, well, what is it when we get these little subtle jabs, we get these put downs. There's a guy named Pierce back in the 70s, about 71, and he talked about microaggressions, these little jabs. And then a friend of mine, who used to be one of my faculty members at Teachers College, Columbia University, Daryl Wing-Sue, started talking about racial microaggressions. He started talking about these micro-assaults, these little teeny assaults, little teeny insults, these little teeny things that made us feel unseen, unvalued, less than. And this is the definition that Daryl Wing-Sue put together for us. I won't bother read it. You can read it. But that is a racial microaggression. Has anybody ever had that experience where someone has said something and you know that they were trying to jab you, but you couldn't call them on it because you didn't know how to even say it? Have you ever had that experience? I know I have. They're tricky. A friend of mine, we used to argue about, is it better to grow up in the northern part of this country or the southern part? Because in the northern part, people tend to be a little politer. They have more microaggressions. And in the south, racism is there. You know your place, right? So is it better to know your place or to stumble into it? I've got mixed feelings about it. Either way, technical term, folks, it sucks. Okay, so all of these have led to race-based traumatic stressors. You've all heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, probably, right? Well, an accumulation of racial microaggressions, an accumulation of constant assaults, an accumulation of walking into spaces where you're not valued, you're not seen, have led people to feeling degraded, have led people to feeling less than, have led people to feeling like they are being dominated by others. So race-based traumatic stressors, you don't see an author, this is Bailey Eaves pulling things together from other folks, negatively impacts how we function, not just how we show up, but how we feel about ourselves. And not just intellectually and emotionally, but spiritually as well. These constant assaults lead us to wounds, to being wounded. And these wounds sometimes result in outbursts of anger, outbursts of rage, and withdrawal and retreat and depression, and wanting just to hide and just not be seen. The realities of intersectionality, so we've got race, but if you add onto it a lifestyle, you add onto it a religious belief. You add on to it your accent. You add on to it something else, the intersectionality of all of what is seen as marginalized. Some people use the word minority categories. The only way we are minorities is in terms of access to power. But in terms of being present, there's nothing minority, nothing little about anything. But the intersection of all of those differences from what is considered mainstream, which changes depending on where you're at, right? All of that can multiply the impact of your feeling less than and feeling unseen. I've been around long enough to know that we can have the best of intentions, but until we're purposely taught how to move through these isms, until we're purposely taught and skilled and have the tools to do this, that nothing is really going to change. There's no need to change. So we created, myself and a couple of colleagues, the Social Justice Initiative that I referenced at the beginning. And we decided if we're going to make social justice our goal, what do we first want to focus on? The first thing we decided to focus on is forgiveness. So forgiveness here, I looked to Wikipedia. Some of you do this all the time, right? I have to remind my students during information sessions and orientation, Google is great. It's great. It can give you all these answers. But guess what? Google can't ask the questions. You gotta know the questions. So I cheated, I looked in Wikipedia. In Wikipedia, the key words here are intentional. If you're gonna forgive, it has to be intentional. It has to be voluntary. Wikipedia used the word victim. It's not a word I'm comfortable with. But it talks about undergoing a change in your attitude, a change in how you regard the offender, change in how you regard yourself. So some people say that forgiveness, a guy named Everett Worthington, he's done a lot of work on forgiveness. He's from Virginia Commonwealth University. And he's done a lot of work on the neuroscience of forgiveness. And what he has found is that when you do an MRI, brain scan, of people that have either forgiven or people that have been forgiven, there's a part of the brain that actually lights up on the brain scan. Imagine that. So forgiveness isn't just about feeling good. It's about also making ourselves happy and healthy. He talks about forgiveness in terms of a trait, a characteristic, and the physical state that I was just talking about. He talks about it in saying that there are two types of forgiveness. You make a decision to forgive, and you emotionally forgive. They're not the same, right? You can decide that you want to forgive, but you can't quite get there, right? So emotional forgiveness and decisional forgiveness. If you Google Everett Worthington, you'll see some of the work that he's done. He's put all of his work online. To me and our Social Justice Initiative, forgiveness is a noun and a verb. It's a process. It's a journey. And I started out believing everyone had to forgive right away to be healthy. My gosh. And when I began to realize, because it's a journey, people will forgive at different points in their lives, and some people won't forgive. I remember my godmother went to church one day, and her reverend, she said something to her reverend. He said, "You're never going to go to heaven." Now imagine the reverend saying this, okay? Pretty yucky. She was from the Bronx, though, so she knew better. Bronx is in New York, if you don't know that. And she called me up and she said, "Honey, he said I'd never go to heaven." I said, "Well, godmother, what did you say?" She said, "I could forgive this person, but I couldn't forget." Well, not only did I speak to a dear friend of mine, but I also read a book by another dear friend, a guy named Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's written this incredible book on forgiveness. Anybody? Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Reconciliation, Apartheid, South Africa. He says, he and his daughter Mfo, who wrote this book on forgiveness, says, you can forgive and not forget. In fact, don't forget. It makes the forgiveness even more powerful. You still remember, but you've forgiven the person. You've forgiven the offender. Okay. So, we're winding down with our definitions. Race equity. There's an organization that's called Equity in the Center, and we'll be looking a little bit more about their model in just a moment. But race equity is actually having the courage to do something to counterbalance the social inequities in our organizations. Stepping out to do something to countervail the racial inequities, the social inequities. The Center for Social Inclusion talks about race equity as both an outcome, where race doesn't determine your socioeconomic class automatically or your stature, and it's a process. When those most impacted are meaningfully involved, right? Meaningfully involved in the creation and the implementation of institutional policies and practices. That's when we have accomplished racial equity in our organization. So to forgive ourselves, we need to find a safe space to be able to own it. Not to forget it, not to push it aside, but to work through it. Thank you so much for doing that right now. We're going to switch heads just a little bit, because we could do a whole day on self, okay? I want us to just get a taste. So a piece of this is going to be a little frustrating, because we're not going to get deep. We're going to get our feet wet in this. Just enough to lead us. Little tools for us to use. We're going to now look at trying this on through an organizational lens. Organizational change, serving those who follow. Serving those who follow. So, these guys named Tuckman and Jensen, real easy way of thinking about change. You can apply it to individuals, organizations, communities. Tuckman and Jensen, right? Unfreeze. What does that mean? I saw some heads nodding. You want to speak to it? Tuckman, what is unfreeze, change, refreeze?
Well, it's sort of taking apart what's there. That if it's frozen and we treat it as if it can't be changed, we can't do anything with it. Right? So it's looking at it. I always think of it as getting messy.
Getting messy, right. If you think about an ice cube, okay? You unfreeze whatever the issue is, okay? Because that's the status quo that you want to change. And then you actually do the change, and then you refreeze it, and that becomes the change. This organization, Equity in the Center, came up with yet another model. And their model is called Awake, Woke, and Work. So, how do you achieve? Again, organizational change, we're looking at race equity. How do we do this? How do we serve those who follow? The first thing they say in an organization is you have to pay attention to the fact that you don't have racial equity in your organization. So one way of doing it is simply looking at who's at the table. Who are in your positions of power? What are the numbers of people that you've got that represent difference, that represent racial balance? And are people of color in positions of power? Then they talk about, if that's the case, then you're woke. Awake, woke, and work. You're woke. Woke means, for them, changing the culture. To actually then say, okay, we may not have the right number of people in the right places, so we need to take a look at culture, which is our underlying beliefs, our underlying values, our underlying assumptions. Is there a reason why people of color don't want to work here? Is there a reason why they leave after being here 2 years? Is there something in the culture that's toxic? And then do the work. After you have a sense of what it is you want to achieve, where people are placed, you do the work. And the work is simply the work. The work can mean recruiting people in places that you haven't looked at before. In higher education, getting your ads out in Hispanic magazines. Putting things in different languages. Making certain that you have got the right talent in the right places. So that your administration is now all white. Right? Okay. Those are models. Now I'm going to share my model. My model I put together with one of my students is what I call the 10S model. It looks a little crazy. What do you see when you look at this model? I can't hear you. Everything is connected. Who said that? Everything is connected. So what that means is that change can start anywhere. We talk about change has to start with a strategic plan. We talk about change has to actually be having the right staff in place, the right strategic plan here. But change can start anywhere. And we'll talk about the S's very quickly. What else do you see when you look at this? It's non-hierarchical. If you start change with the strategy, you start change in the services that your organization delivers, you start change in your administrative structure or your board structure, you start change with the style of your leadership, you start change in your HR systems, your budgeting systems, you start change by moving where your organization is at, by putting it in the community, putting the classroom in the community ready. Awesome. You start change by taking a look at values, the skills that people bring, the people that are working there, the talents, the people that have an investment, the stakeholders. Not one of these S's is more important than the other. So in the 10S model, what you see, it's all interconnected, and change can start anywhere. You start where the passion is at. And it's alliterative. Something I told you at the beginning I like. When I said Dean Darwin. These are all S's, so they're easy for me to read. This model, I actually discovered a similar model. I expanded it and adapted it to fit the nonprofit sector. There were these two guys named Pascal and Athos back in 1981. They went over to Japan. And they said, oh my gosh, Japan, this country bombed the heck out of it. Why now are all of these video machines and cars and why are they, what's the magic here? Why has Japan come back? And they found that the Japanese culture was paying attention to looking at different components of an organization and starting to change that way. Not in mass, but where the passion was. So if people are passionate about making change in their leadership, let me give you a good example. I moved to Cleveland, and I was asked to actually be a consultant for an organization. Because the organization was not, it was a child welfare organization. And they were like, we don't know why children aren't coming anymore. What's wrong? I walked around the neighborhood, talked to people, and came back and said, I don't want a dime, don't pay me. I said, why not? I said, because it's simple. You've been here 20 years. The children have grown up. You have no children anymore. You've got adults. So, what did they need to do? They needed to either retrain their staff from working with children to elder care, or they needed to move their organization, or they needed to change their mission, their strategy. So, that organization needed to wake up and not just keep doing what it was doing, but it needed to wake up and go through a change. So, now we're going to talk about community. Community change. Saul Alinsky. Some of you have heard about Saul Alinsky, right? Okay, who's Saul Alinsky? Saul Alinsky, Chicago, right? Okay, Saul Alinsky. I met him many, many years ago. And Saul Alinsky had a book, and he had and the book was titled 12 Rules for Radicals. And he had 12 rules for radicals. I'm not going to read these to you, but you've got them. They're pretty progressive thinking, particularly back in '71. But I will tell you that, rumor has it, one of the Alinskyeites was Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Another Alinskyite, believe it or not, was Hillary Clinton. Okay? Take a look at them. Ask me a question about any of these. Let me tell you about number 10. When I look at number 10, I think of Aikido. I think of Tai Chi, I think of martial arts. What do I mean by that? If this really sweet woman all of a sudden got very angry and just rushed at me, and I did this and I blocked her, we both get hurt. The Aikido principle, I take her energy, I use that energy to flip her. So, when I look at number 10, if you push a negative hard enough, it'll push through and become a positive. Now, I'm not sure if Saul Alinsky would agree with my example. This one is a little tricky for me. Pick the target. Freeze it, personalize, polarize it. Don't go after people. Don't go after institutions, go after people. Call somebody out. Ridicule them, because people hurt faster than institutions. Sounds a little rough, okay? But sometimes, what did you say?
I said it is rough. That's his whole philosophy.
That's exactly right. One that's really, really cool that I have defined right here is, there are a couple of them. Never go outside the expertise of your own people, because it'll make everybody confused if you ask them to do things that they don't know how to do. But go outside the expertise of the enemy, figure out what they do, and then be smarter than they are in a particular area. Make the enemy live up to its own book of rules. An example, we will respond to every letter that's written to us. Okay, community, 300,000 letters. Let's see if they can live up to their own rules. It shakes them up a little bit. It gets them a little disorganized. And when people are a little disorganized and upset, there's opportunity for change. A friend of mine, Mark Homan, some of you know his work, he just wrote this new book, Rules of the Game. He talks about the essential 8. Act with purpose, clarify the issue, know who the key players are, get a whole bunch of people together, don't go out there alone. Take some time to think about what your strategic action is going to be. Take that action, use that action, and then repeat over again. It's a different version of Alinsky. Freire has a different way of looking at this. Freire talks about the concept of dialogue. Dialogue for Freire is something like this. I have a position. I have a position about something, position A. Ray, if you don't know this man, you really need to get to know him. He's awesome. Ray has a position C. Through dialogue, through positive regard, him for himself, me for myself, him for me for him, positive regard of self and other, trust in self and other, and unconditional caring of self and other. We co-create a position B. Dialogue is the act of creation. But you've got to have positive regard for yourself and for the other. You've got to have trust in yourself and the other, and unconditional caring. Not easy to do. Remember, Paulo lived at a time when people were being told they couldn't be taught to read, and yet he was brave enough to talk about the only thing that was going to change this was to level the playing field for what he called the oppressors to realize the value of the oppressed people. So, having met Paulo, myself and some friends, we wrote this book called Sustaining Our Spirits. If anybody's interested, I'll share it with you. I took Paulo's language. And I began to think about dialogue for me and those three elements. And I said, what is needed is humility, faith, hope, and love. Okay? Humility, coolness, being grounded, recognizing your own incompleteness and holding negativity and praise, holding microaggressions, racial assaults, and honoring you, holding them lightly, because they're all temporary. Even positions of power, they are positions just for a moment in time. So you have a title of a dean, or a department chair, or a president, or an endowed chair, or the oldest in your family. I mean, something that you feel good about, but hold it lightly. Hold it lightly. Faith. Faith is walking forward knowing that the ground is going to meet your feet. Oops. Faith and fear have a very hard time coexisting. Think about the last time you wanted to do something. You wanted to go to school, you wanted to take a class, and you didn't. What got in the way? Fear of failure. You wanted to say something, fear of looking ridiculous. Okay? Faith. Fear opened the door. Yeah. Fear knocked on the door. Fear knocked on the door. Faith answered. There was no one there. Faith and fear have a very hard time coexisting. Hope, a belief that more and better can come and will come. I see hope as the wind in the sails of faith. Hope that I'm going to learn something when I come here. Hope that I'm going to learn something when I go to school. Hope that this relationship is going to work out. Hope. With hope. I had a conversation with Pablo Freire a long time ago. I was just talking about this with your new dean. And he was so upset. He had tears in his eyes. And I said, what's wrong, Pablo? He said, I don't see you Afro-Americans as having hope anymore. This was a while ago. That's another table we were doing. I don't see Afro-Americans as having hope. He said, without hope, they're not going to make it. They're burning their own buildings. They're fighting one another. Hope is the reason you get up in the morning. You hope that things are going to work out. Love. Agape love. What's agape love? Unconditional. Agape love is much stronger than the love a parent has for a child. Agape love is stronger than a partner has for another partner. Agape love is simply because the person exists. Not because of who they are or what they do or what they know or how they dress or what their title is. Agape love is just because the person exists. We're co-sharing this space and time. I will tell you that these ingredients, once in place, facilitate an opportunity for authentic dialogue. If you can find a way to live these, you will be creating spaces where people are seen, where you're seen, where everyone knows they are valuable and valued. This is how I live, my friends. And I haven't called Pollyanna. This is how I dean. It's the only way I know how to do it. And I may be the oldest in this room. Okay. We talked about one of my intentions. What can you do? What can your community do? However you define community, to create safe spaces for dialogue, spaces to share stories of struggle. What we used to call resiliency, we're now calling grit. Because sharing stories of struggle and stories of grit, when you been able to overcome, technical term, crap. Those are antidotes. We talked about it, naming it, claiming it. Don't hide it. Don't suppress it. Don't wish it away. Call it right out loud for what it is. Find the space. So those are the only things that are antidotes to the toxism of racism that will allow you to spread the healing powers of forgiveness and racial equity. What can you do? What can your community do? Okay, I got it. So, forgiveness, racial healing, and racial equity generate authentic dialogue. Dialogue, essential for sustainable social justice for all. We name it, we claim it. When it's good, when it's bad, we own it. Welcome to the movement. There are a bunch of us out there that have been waiting for you all to be with us. Thank you so much.